I thought I would just start by noting that technology, and particularly information technology, is transforming modern life more than most people really realize. I think it's easy to underestimate the degree to which our lives not just have been changed, but will be changed in coming years. And I think many of you will probably hear ideas on this panel that underscore that point, that you're going to hear a lot of things you haven't thought about, because these people are professionals who think about this kind of stuff, and they are a really amazing group of experts on particularly what's happening as intelligence goes into physical systems that then go out into the world. There's a whole gamut of issues that we could talk about regarding internet services and apps that themselves raise plenty of ethical, moral, legal questions. For the most part, that's not what we're here to talk about. But I don't know how many of you know something, for example, that's already a commercial product called Baxter, which is a $22,000 computer that is currently sold to work alongside workers on a light manufacturing assembly line and can be trained, programmed in effect, by any ordinary person. Anyone in this room could effectively program Baxter to pick up a box or pick up something, stick it in a box, put wrapping paper in, put tape on, and shove it along. So that's a $22,000 robot, works right alongside humans, is roughly the same size as a human. So that's one thing that's going on. Another thing that's going on is that drones are, you've heard about Amazon is going to ostensibly deliver products by drones. Many of you have bought drones on Amazon and flown them in your backyards, because that's very easy to do. And they have cameras on them, and if you want to, you could fly that over your neighbor and hover over their bathroom. I mean, these things are possible today with a $150 thing you buy on Amazon. Then, self-driving cars. Some of you may have just scurried over from the Sebastian Thrun session, as I did, where one of our panelists, Ken, was just interviewing Sebastian, who's the guy at Google who's overseen the self-driving cars project, the Google Glass project. This is not a fantasy. Self-driving cars are really practical now, and to some degree, the only real question is how will we integrate them into the transportation ecosystem that we have. And of course, the price has to come down, but with volume, anything can become affordable, and I think there would be a market. But you'll hear a lot about that on this panel. Google Glass, which I mentioned Thrun also is responsible for, is another interest of several of our panelists, which is a technology that raises plenty of ethical, social, and moral questions, as I'm sure any of you would feel if someone walked into the bathroom wearing one with you, which happens every day, and it leads to tension. Then, like at a macro scale, Google, which is a company that will probably be mentioned periodically during this discussion, just bought a satellite company called Skybox, which they paid about $500 million for. And this is a company that intends in the near future to launch satellites of sufficient number that they will be able to take real-time video of the entire planet 3 times a day at high resolution. Now, that's not possible today, but that's their plan. It's not far off. And it's not that expensive because of the miniaturization of things and the ability of us to get things into space more affordably, et cetera. So, that will, for example, allow some company, Google, if they are one, and probably there'll be other companies, these are companies, to know, if you moved your car out of the illegal parking space, or, whether you, mowed your lawn, or whether you're digging an illegal swimming pool, or there's all kinds of things that it'll know if it wants to know them. I'm just throwing these things out because I'm trying to set the context, and I'm almost finished. But to really go to the ultimate, there are today on the market in Japan, as one of our panelists told me, sex robots, right? And they're fairly realistic, I suppose, and I don't know too much about them, but you can be sure they are coming soon to your local strip mall or something like it. Whether they or will, that's one thing maybe we'll discuss. Should they be outlawed? In any case, probably not, but it's so interesting to particularly mention Google, which Ken just was talking about a lot on stage at Belly Up. They bought They also bought a drone company for high-altitude drones. They bought a company that makes robots that can run way faster than a human being and that were built for military applications. They have the satellite company, as I mentioned. They're doing self-driving cars. They have Google Glass. They're an interesting one. Facebook even has bought a drone company, so they're not being left entirely out of all this. Anyway, the point is, technologies are emerging in the physical world, guided by computers that have enormous ramifications for us and social life and how we feel about those machines and each other. And so that's what we're here to talk about. Now, I'm going to try to introduce everybody, but they didn't give me too many details, although I talked to them all. So starting at that end, Ryan Calo. Where do you teach again?
I teach at the University of Washington.
Washington, right, UW. I did know that, but I just forgot it. And he's a lawyer. You're the only lawyer on the panel, right? You're not a lawyer, are you, Missy? No. So, but that's interesting because he looks at things in some very interesting ways because of that. Now, we also have two artists on the panel, and one of them is Alex Reben. Is that pronounced right?
Reben.
Reben, okay.
Close.
Well, just learned you were on the panel today, so forgive me. Anyway, he is an artist, but he's also a roboticist and is doing some interesting things here at the festival with this little thing, which maybe we'll have time for him to demonstrate, which is a robotic speaking camera that interviews people and is making a video here at the Ideas Festival with 4 of these in various locations. And he has some very interesting experience with how people relate to robots as compared to each other. Now, Missy Cummings is at Duke, and she's a former military officer who is you're a psychologist? No, but you...
Engineer.
But you get into a lot of the psychology of this stuff.
I do.
So you're not a psychologist, but she looks at things a little more from the, how we feel about some of these interactions and what our feelings may say about how we'll use these things in the future. And finally, Ken Goldberg is also an artist, but a professor at Berkeley, and he does a lot of different things. How would you describe what you do?
I am, well, a roboticist. I think that's what
A roboticist?
Yeah,
Okay,
that affects my art and my research.
Well, we're going to just start, thank you. We're going to start, I'm going to let each of them talk a little bit about what they're most excited about or worried about in this realm. And so let me start with you, Ryan. We're talking here about the ethics and legal ramifications of some of these technologies. What are you most excited about and what are you most worried about?
It's the same thing, actually, David, that I'm most excited about and most worried about. So as you say, I'm a lawyer by training. I'm a law professor. I teach torts, right, when you sue each other, not in contract. And I teach a course on robotics law and policy that's interdisciplinary in nature. And I've been looking at the legal and policy aspects of various robotics for years. So last year I got to testify before the Senate about the domestic use of drones, and I founded a program around driverless cars at Stanford University with the School of Engineering and the law school at the time that I was there. But I have to say, what's most exciting to me right now in this space is the prospect of emergent behavior. And what I mean by that is the same thing that Stephen Johnson, who I actually just met today earlier at a reception. He's like a hero of mine, and I got to have a chance to talk to him, and it was really wonderful. But what he means by that is behavior that is useful, right? That's the kind of thing that you want there, but it's also surprising. You don't quite know what the system or the robot or the many robots are going to do. And this is the idea of having, say, multiple drones in the air at the same time, or high-speed trading algorithms, or all kinds of other systems that display this useful, but in many ways surprising behavior. And I think that's a really elegant way to think about some of the main legal challenges, because if you think about the law, it relies upon being able to anticipate what's going to happen, right? I mean, in the criminal law, you got to intend for something to happen. You got to want it to happen. And if it happens in a way that surprises you, even if you kind of put the pieces in motion, not knowing what's going to happen, you lack what the criminal law calls mens rea, right? The ready mind. Or in tort law, which I teach, a lot of it turns on whether the action you did was reasonably foreseeable. It's the kind of thing that an ordinary person would actually see around the corner. And some of these behaviors in these more complex systems, short of I don't know if we're ever going to get to like, truly smart machines that are as smart as people. I kind of very doubtful we're ever going to get there, but more complex than what we have today. And so I think there's a tremendous amount of promise in these systems displaying emergent properties, but it poses real challenges for law and for legal institutions.
Okay, well, that's a bunch of issues we can pursue. Alex, you sort of are trying to mess with our brains right now in real time with some of the things you're doing. Why don't you describe some of the projects you're currently working on and why you're doing that?
So I'm really interested how people and machines interact with each other and how the interaction between a person and machine can sometimes be better than with a person to a person. So we described a bit about these robots that are here shooting a documentary. The interesting thing about them is that a lot of people find it a lot easier to talk to them than they would for a film crew to come up with them with a camera. Part of it is because these guys are very cute and non-judgmental, and you can hold them in your hands, and they're made out of cardboard, and they're very nice. So the design of them makes you feel like you're comfortable in that situation. So it's pretty interesting how this can eke out better stories from people. And perhaps with more research, eke out stories from people who just simply can't share those stories. So perhaps soldiers with post-traumatic stress disorder or children with autism, people who have a hard time telling their stories to others, but in effect, these stories could be helpful for both them and other people. I'm also interested in how simple aspects of machines can anthropomorphize them or give them these different personalities. So as an artist, I also look at sculpture that has to do with machines and their behaviors. So one series I'm working on is robots with personality disorders, and robots with both human and robot personality disorders. And what that may mean when we do have social robots in our homes and they misbehave and don't act how we expect them to, they could create psychological problems for people as they don't act how we expect them to.
Well, there's a lot
And
there.
they're funny.
We could unpack some of that, and hopefully we will. And I'm hoping the panelists will ask each other questions, too. So, Missy, talk a little bit about your work and why you're doing it and what you'd say the most important aspects of it are right now.
So most of my work focuses around how to decide how much automation should go into a system and how much should the human be in the system, kind of a human automation computer balancing equation. And in fact, I'm going to give you all my trade secrets Sunday morning. So if you want to come hear how to do that, I'm going to give a longer talk Sunday. But some of the more pressing issues that I think we have to think about that I'm working on right now are latent issues. They're almost like emergent issues, but these are issues that people don't really think about in design. So I'm doing some work for Google right now. In advance of the driverless car coming, one of the things that we know that's going to happen is as soon as you get into this car and it performs relatively well for 90% of the time, then you're going to start texting and driving like crazy or watching your laptop. You're a terrible driver. You are all terrible, terrible, and the Google car or any driverless car is going to make you worse, especially driving long distances. So we're looking at long distance driving and just how when you're in some kind of automatic mode like this and then something requires your attention, just how bad will it be? And so this is a smaller topic of boredom and automation that we're researching. We've been researching in my lab a long time. Drone operators are fantastically bored, and how does that affect their performance? Turns out that maybe you should let them text while flying a drone because doing something is actually better than doing nothing. And so distraction is not always a bad thing. So I think those kind of latent issues are important that we need to think about. But one of the other issues that I've been working on is in the last couple of years, I did a part-time job for the government working as a program manager for a $100 million robotic helicopter program, helping the military get that on board. And the one thing that I realized while I was on the inside, shh, don't tell anybody, cover up that robot, is that I think the government is in serious trouble. The United States government is in serious trouble for many reasons, but one of them, and an important one, is that the government virtually has no experts on the inside that understand autonomous robotic systems. And that's important because they don't understand how to test them. So I don't think this country is ready to put together a testing program to find out whether or not any driverless car is really safe for the road. And that's also true for drones in the commercial airspace. And that's been a big deal for the FAA test sites recently. I will submit to you that the 6 FAA test sites that are around the country, one of which is in Nevada, not too far from here, they cannot hire the people that they're going to need to actually run these programs. Our country simply is not putting out enough of these, and the ones that we do train are going to private companies like Google, Oracle, Apple, and even the defense industry really cannot get the people that it needs for the robotics programs that it'd like to have. You could say that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think it's certainly a problem when our government cannot assess whether or not a technology is decent or not, or even ready to be deployed. And then the extension of that is, but the rest of the world is working on it. And so it is my prediction that we're really about to have what's handed to us on a platter, because other countries are going to be coming up very quickly. And however you feel about drones, whether you're pro-drone or anti-drone, one thing you have to remember is drones are a true democratization of technology. People in garages can now build drones that can rival those that defense companies build. And in fact, in many cases, exceed the capabilities that defense companies. Google has it over a barrel than many of the defense companies in terms of potential capability. And so when you start looking at a shift like that of how one individual could potentially change an industry, we're in a new place in the world. And we as a nation, we need to rethink maybe education, what we're focusing on, the need for more emphasis on software development, and also maybe restructuring the way that we maybe compensate and incentivize our government employees, because nobody wants to work for them anymore.
But real quickly, so you're saying other countries don't have that same problem?
Other countries do not have the same problem, I think, in terms of having the haves and have-nots, in terms of a gross disparity between the level of competence in the commercial world and the level of competence in the government world. But at the same time, no other country has the amount of resources that they're sinking into that as well.
Okay, well, this government thing I'd like to come back to in a minute. But Ken, what the heck are you doing?
Well, I do have a question for the audience, though, because we talked about this at the opening session, and this is a milestone for the Ideas Festival. And I'm just curious, how many people in the audience have smoked any weed tonight, or eaten any gummy bears? I'm just curious. The camera operator? Okay, good.
We're not going to let you ask any questions. I'm glad you asked. Okay.
I just want to put it in perspective.
But now people will raise their hands freely to say so. That's a
right.
change.
So I'm interested.
Why did you ask that?
I'm just curious about people, and no. So a couple of things I'm working on.
You're a jealous Californian.
Yes, I am a jealous Californian. I'm gonna do some investigation later tonight. But the things I'm interested in is how the cloud is changing robotics. How the cloud is really. I have a particular theory about that. It's actually huge effect. That essentially it's giving, from a robotics perspective, it's giving us the capability that robots could have essentially unlimited memory and computation. And that's really like opening up worlds and potentials that we never thought of before.
Which could be manifested in flying robots, driving
All
robots,
across
sex
the board.
robots, whatever, right?
Yes, and so I'll be talking about that tomorrow, doing this talk at 2:40. But what I wanted to talk about tonight was another thing I'm interested in, which has to do with our human response to robots. And how many of you are familiar with the idea of the uncanny, or the uncanny valley? Okay, so I'll just summarize this really briefly.
10 people.
Yeah, so I think it has a lot to, it's actually very helpful for understanding how we deal with robots. And even Alex's, system right there, is it called Boxy now?
Blab Droid's the new.
Blab Droid? Good, okay, good.
Jamie.
But as artists and roboticists, I mean, they both are thinking about this idea that actually goes back to Sigmund Freud in an essay in 1919, and actually has a longer history that goes all the way back to Descartes. But it's the idea, the uncanny is a translation of a German word, which I can't quite say, which is unheimlich. So forgive me, all the German speakers, but it means this feeling you have when you encounter something that is you think is familiar, but suddenly is strange. And so it's something we encounter in the context of something like corpses or ghosts or vampires zombies, robots. And Freud talked about this. It's this sort of like the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. And I think of it as the opposite of déjà vu. So déjà vu is when you see something unfamiliar and it seems strangely familiar, like you've seen it before, right? You can imagine that. So unheimlich is the opposite of that. It's where you see something familiar, but it seems strangely unfamiliar. And it's a very well-known phenomenon. It's almost universal in all cultures. And it's this instinct that has been studied in psychology and psychoanalysis, but also in aesthetics, because a lot of writers have used this. So from Gothic literature, looking at the idea of how ghosts and Frankenstein, for example, plays into this, but how many works of art use this or play off of this instinct to attract our attention, to basically draw us in and make us think about things. And it's related to concepts like memento mori and the abject and surrealism. So it's been really very carefully examined from art historical perspective. But in 1970, there was an essay about it from the context of robotics, who said, there was a writer in Japan, Masahiro Mori, who wrote about something he called the uncanny valley, which is when robots become too human-like and they make us profoundly uncomfortable. And it relates to computer graphics and animation. So, example, the Polar Express, the movie, sort of crossed that boundary into the uncanny valley. It was too lifelike. And they actually moved away from that. So if you look at all the Pixar films now, the eyes of the characters are very simplified. They're just like white on black, right? So the idea of the uncanny valley is very, very important and I think profound. I think it affects lots of things of our experience and the things we're talking about tonight. From, in particular, Google Glass, I think we can understand Google Glass from that context. The second part of the theory is that Freud talks about it in regard to being watched, the sense of being watched, like someone's watching you surreptitiously or surveillance, so related to drones. And so the Google Glass, I think, combines these two effects. It's both, when someone's wearing Google Glass, you're not sure of their status. They look vaguely alien to you, so that raises that specter. And at the same time, there's the idea of, are you being surveilled? Are you being watched by some unseen third party? So I think of this as the uncanny double whammy. The Google Glass really hits at our core of our psychology, and I'm curious about that, and I think it's why Google Glass has hit this moment of this sort of resistance in the popular culture, because people are really not sure about how they're going to embrace it or what they're going to do with it.
So the thing I'd love any of you to talk about, but you could start, or anybody pick up on, I want to know what these concerns and enthusiasms are going to mean for what's going to surprise us in society next. I mean, if we have this very peculiar trust, and primarily trust of computers as you're describing it, in a way that we don't even have for humans, and then we have this simultaneous suspicion, given that we are increasingly going to be surrounded by robots in one way or another, what would you hypothesize we will do or should do to allow that to continue? Or are we going to stop it? Anybody, but, you know.
I can speak to that because it's a concept that we work a lot with in driving or operating any vehicle. It's called risk homeostasis. You tend to adjust your risk for the world around you as the world changes. And so while me personally, a child of the 80s really, you know, that grew up in that time frame, and I really, when I see somebody, it's funny when you say that about Google Glass, you know what my visceral response is every time I see somebody wearing Google Glass? I want to rip it off their face and stomp on it right in front of them. Right? I just really hate that thing.
And that's actually happened quite a few times, really, particularly in San Francisco. It has happened.
But, you know, I'm in my 40s. My 20-year-old students do not have that same feeling. And so this world of being surrounded by cameras, I can't even imagine. I don't actually have a Facebook account because I'm much more private than that. But again, people who are 20 years younger than me feel like they can just put it all out there, and that's part of that's their culture, right? And it's easy for us to get judgmental about, that I can't have that thing. That's not my value set. But that's not everyone's value set, and that's part of this homeostasis. So there's a risk adjustment happening. And it's happening in, across generations of who feels more comfortable with what kind of technologies. And so that's when I say, even though I want to stomp on, don't ever wear Google Glass in front of me, because I'm actually a really fun person. But if you come talk to me, I will be like, but, that's not me. My daughter, who is 6 right now, she's probably going to love it.
I'm curious, how many people in this room, when they see someone wearing Google Glass, has a basically negative reaction? That's a relatively small percentage. I think many of you are being dishonest. But anyway,
Or stoned.
or you're stoned, right? Ken's very interested in that topic. What?
Or seen it. Or they
You've
haven't
never seen it. Okay, well then you're exempt. If you live in New York or San Francisco, you've seen it a lot. Ryan, you had something.
Well, so you
Well,
haven't
it
even
depends on
seen
what
it,
neighborhood
yeah.
you live in then. Okay.
So, I mean, you can picture it though, right? So imagine your glasses and you have a little camera on it, and it's staring right at you with its inscrutable robot eye. That's what it feels like.
There's a lot of people walking
yeah.
around with it these days.
There are, well, I think maybe more sounds like more in our communities in Seattle and San Francisco and New York than perhaps in the rest of the country. Not even in New York, huh?
Well, on 14th Street.
Fair enough, yeah, fair enough. It's coming to a city near you. In Seattle, where I live, there's actually several bars that have decided to ban Google Glass and not allow you to go into it, right? And so when anything gets banned, the lawyers amongst us say, ooh, something got banned, it's illegal, it's a law, and we get excited about it. So what I want to introduce a concept to you all that I think is very relevant, and maybe hear some responses in the spirit of asking my co-panelist questions. I'm really interested in this idea of functional equivalence. Okay? When something could be a robot, but instead we use something else for that reason. Or when something could be something else, but instead we use a robot. And Google Glass plays into this. And one example I think about a lot, we talked about this a lot in my robotics law and policy class, is imagine that Amazon, which contemplates delivering things by drone, and they're having a terrible problem with it, and the FAA won't let them, and so forth and so forth. Imagine if instead of doing that, they decided to deliver it by carrier pigeon. All right, we've been using carrier pigeons to deliver things, since like the Middle Ages. Like clergy would put messages in them. In World War II, we used them to take photographs and so forth. We've been using them a lot. They're actually quite reliable. And if little things from your pharmacy were delivered to your house by carrier pigeon, functionally equivalent to what Amazon wants to do, the FAA silent on it. Right? And imagine that you ban people from using Google Glass, and someone comes in with Google Glass, and you say, "I'm sorry. You're an asshole, you're a glass hole, you're not allowed to wear this." That's what they call them, incidentally. And the person's response is to look you right in the eye and say, actually, I need this. I need this because I don't like dogs, and I need a service dog. And in fact, this has a bunch of apps that are enabled to help me negotiate the world. Right? This helps me determine, I can't see very well, this helps me determine whether or not I got the correct change. And it's functionally equivalent to a seeing eye dog or to some other thing. And then suddenly the valence sort of will change on us, right? And so the law struggles with this all the time. We see something, and for reasons that are not even fully appreciated, right? I mean, one last example, and then I'll move on, or I'll cede. But basically, drones are a fabulous example. I wrote a paper a couple of years ago called "The Drone as Privacy Catalyst," where I predicted that a drone of all technologies would force a national conversation around privacy. Why? Because privacy is not something that's easy for us usually to envision, and we can't figure out what privacy harm means. It's like what's happening before drones, like in privacy, like two pieces of information are being correlated someplace in some distant server. We can't really form a mental model of it. But we sure can form a mental model of drones flying over our cities and looking down at us. And in fact,
like my next door neighbor's bathroom?
Like your next door neighbor example. And so there's a place where it's not like you can. People always ask, like, aren't you worried about spying with Google Glass and surreptitious spying in the bathroom? Absolutely not. You can buy a more powerful spy device on a Sky Mall catalog when you're flying across the country to spy on people, like a little pen that you don't even know is a pen with a camera on it. That's much more powerful a spy device, if you're interested in that kind of thing, than is Google Glass. But Google Glass has this visceral reaction. So for me, this functional equivalence is a big part of the story. It plays into the idea of uncanny.
Well, it's also interesting because Google Glass announces itself as a intelligent surveilling device,
Sure.
which could be said to be a virtue, but and he was using the word transparency a lot in your discussion with him. He doesn't want to have you pretend you're not doing it, but it's true. There's plenty of other ways to get around the same thing. Now, you wanted to talk first, and then we'll get over here.
You mean Sebastian was saying that, right?
Yeah.
He came up with the idea. Yeah.
Talking a lot about transparency.
Right. No, I think Ryan, you're absolutely right. Privacy. I one time thought of it as that it's like oxygen. It's like this invisible thing that you never think about until it goes away, and then suddenly you really notice it. And yeah, I think that the glass is exactly doing that. It's creating this new conversation. It's triggering. It's a catalyst, and it is generational. I agree with you, Missy. And it's absolutely interesting to watch how it evolves. I mean, cameras. Remember when cameras first came out? When Brandeis was writing about the consumer camera, created a huge,
Yeah, the first Kodaks were hugely controversial. They were
Right.
considered privacy invading when people took them to the beach in
Right.
1910 or whatever it was.
Exactly. Alex?
Yeah, so I think you're getting to the drone example, like the pigeon versus the drone. I'm wondering what if the drone itself was a beautiful object, or what if it came to you with a giant smile? Right now there are these scary things with propellers and stuff, so the public views it that way as this dangerous thing that all of a sudden could fall on them and kill them. I think this is also one of the reasons why Google put a giant smiley face on its new autonomous cars. Right, there's no engineering reason whatsoever why they had to make them cute and bubbly.
Amazon has a smile automatically, so that's good. They have that smile
That's
right in
right.
their logo. They can just put that on the drone.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if it's purely a perception problem versus an engineering problem. I'm wondering what is once the drones reach a stage of being well engineered, what would their failure rates be versus other dangers, struck by lightning or something of that sort.
I want to intensify this conversation because I think we're being too sanguine, even up here. And most of you were less sanguine on the phone, by the way. I want to just tell you that. But tomorrow morning, Andy McAfee is going to talk about his book, The Second Machine Age, and what his book that he wrote with Eric Brynjolfsson is really about is a serious set of concerns about the impact of automation and robotics on work. And they're serious concern and they're not by any means the only ones, that a very, very large percentage of workers in modern society are highly likely, or certainly replaceable, and they will either have to take a lot less money or they will be replaced by robots because it's going to be way more affordable. Now, given that there are so many people that think that kind of thing is likely, it seems to me we are heading toward a world with more robots even than the discussion up to now might sort of be implying. Do you all think of it that way? I mean, or not?
Let me take that drone question because I get this all the time. And in fact, I have to look around because I'm always looking for these little red laser dots coming after me from the FedEx pilot union because they really hate me and they're trying to get me, I get seriously bad hate emails from pilots, but particularly cargo pilots, because they sense it. They see the pending end of their world. And it's very interesting to me as an academic and a former pilot for the military to see this, to see the visceral response. It's probably very much how the cart and horse buggy driver felt when the car started coming around. There's technology was kind of clunky at first, but you have this sense that it's coming and it's going to replace you. And the fact of the matter is, yes, we are going to replace pilots. About a year and a half ago, the military had a landmark achievement in that it became safer for the military to send a drone on a fighter or a bomber mission than a manned mission. Okay, it's a done deal. Not every single aviation mission will be turned over to drones, but the bulk of them will within the next 50 years. That's going to happen. But I think in the longer term, what we don't realize what's going to happen is, yes, some jobs are going to go away, but entirely new jobs and on the periphery of the infrastructure are going to be created around it. Those of you who are very industrial minded right now, what you need to go out and do is start a robot maintenance company, because when all these robots start coming around, air, ground, sea, whatever, we will not be able to fix them all. And so that is yet a huge another extension that we're going to see. But I think if you even take another big step back, in 100 years, give or take, this world is going to hit world peak population. We are going to be on the decline in a very short period of time, not in my lifetime, but in a couple of lifetimes. What does that mean? It means that we will not be able to keep our lifestyle like we want it unless we have robots, because the human race will be on the decline. Unless, I don't want to get into and any gene types of reproductive issues. But that said, I will tell you right now, I'm working with companies across the world in many different industries who are very concerned about the fact that they cannot get workers to do agricultural, mining, anywhere remote surveillance, oil drilling, these types of things. These are companies right now that are already feeling this population crunch. And without robots in those fields, we will not be able to sustain the life, at least at the levels that we are now, for very much longer.
Well, wasn't it you on the phone who was saying the reason Amazon wants drones to deliver these packages is not because they think somebody's going to be back at the office controlling the drone. The drones are going to be autonomous. They're going to replace somebody who would have otherwise driven it to the house, right?
We did have
In
that
Europe.
conversation, David, on the phone. Yeah, no, I mean, so basically, I think that's right. So first, two things about Amazon drones. Number one is, it's not a publicity stunt. These folks are serious about it. Like, they've come to the University of Washington and given demos of where they are with the technology. They have engineers that they've hired away from other places, very, very serious places like Nissan that work on autonomous systems at Nissan now work at Amazon and so forth. And yeah, they contemplate delivering things autonomously. I mean, the issue is that if they were going to just have a delivery person, like a pilot, deliver every single package, then they might as well send that person to you on a bike, right? I mean, they're not gaining much. They only gain a lot if they can have it go somewhat autonomously, perhaps as, you were just reminding me that maybe someone has the ability to come in the loop. But autonomy is a big part of this picture. It's also the same thing, incidentally, that Peter Singer, in his wonderful book that I recommend to everybody here, Wired for War, he talks about why the military adopts robotics and what's pushing the military especially towards more autonomous weapons. And the short answer is speed, right? These things can do it faster. And if another country were to have autonomous weapons that were faster than our soldiers, we're going to deploy autonomous weapons so that we can keep pace. And this is a microcosm of it at Amazon. In order to solve that last mile problem, they need autonomy.
Okay, so two of you have now said we're going to have militaries fighting each other with robots. Does that mean we're more likely to go to war? Because we don't kill anybody? Are we going to have
Wouldn't it be wonderful if all robots just fought in Antarctica and whoever was technologically superior?
I think there was a movie like
There's a
that.
Star Trek
Well,
episode about
many
this.
movies like
Yeah.
that. But seriously, Missy, this is a question for you.
It's a great question. I don't think that the increase in robots will necessarily lead to an increase in war. I think it could lead to an increase in a couple of bad decisions to get into areas that maybe we shouldn't. But I actually, when I take the bigger view picture, because our military and other militaries are not able to keep pace with the technological achievements from the private sector, what I wonder is whether or not we're going to be hiring Google or buying our drones on Amazon, or, because the military cannot keep pace with the rest of the world. So what will those wars look like, and who are we going to have to hire? The fact of the matter is, the PRISM program, where the United States government basically spied on everyone in this room, they couldn't do it by themselves. The NSA could not do it. The CIA could not do it. They had to have Google. They had to have all the internet service providers and Facebook do it for them. So we hired out private sector to spy on us. So I think that's a good metaphor for what will the future look like with robots. Who are we going to have to hire to actually fight the wars for us?
One more government question, and I think we should definitely hear from you all with your comments and questions.
Can I add something to
Yeah,
it?
you can throw anything you want.
Because one thing, I think about the distinction between Orwell and Huxley in many of these discussions. And Orwell's vision was that we would have Big Brother, and that we'd be watched by some higher authority that would be sort of controlling us and repressing us, right? And Huxley's vision in Brave New World was very different. It was that there were all these gadgets and cool things, and we were just going to want them, and we were going to basically bring it on ourselves. And it wasn't that some external, hierarchical surveillance system, but we would be doing it to ourselves. It's more like covalence. And Huxley has been right. I mean, it's been much more of that kind of thing. I think the idea of the drone, part of what's going to happen, I think, is not that it's so much, it will replace delivery, but I think what's going to happen is we're going to start delivering a lot more. This is something, the vision that I think Amazon has is that we're going to change the way we actually shop. Nowadays we still go to the market and we do a bunch of things, but so much more, I think we're going to see a situation where if you need a carton of milk, you're going to go on the internet and order it, and it's going to appear on your front doorstep in about 15 minutes. I mean, I can see that happening. And so what it means is that it's not just going to fulfill a demand that we have now, but it's going to be this new demand. It's going to enormously mushroom, where we're going to want things and expect things, and I see something on TV and I order it, and I go outside and there it's waiting. It's right there. That is a world I do think we're going to have, and the only way to do that is by having drones. Not that our skies are going to be dark with drones. I think it's going to be kind of different, where delivery trucks are going to pull up into a neighborhood, the roof will open, and a bunch of drones will do the last little bit and drop it in our front yard. So, but you're dead. I think you're completely right. This is not a publicity stunt. This is definitely happening.
Okay, Missy quite strongly said she's worried about the government's ability to even understand this stuff, much less regulate it and oversee it effectively. Does anyone else on the panel share that concern? Do you share that concern also?
No.
Okay, 3 out of 4. Go ahead, Alex.
No, I do.
You do. I figured you did. I think this comes up in almost any technological topic, but go ahead.
I was just going to pose a question to the audience that we're talking about wars and things that are sort of outside our sphere, but we're going to be dealing with technology, I think, really soon that is going to be taking our lives in our hands. We kind of do this already with trains that run by themselves, but you must know this situation. Imagine a self-driving car goes up a hill and sees that there's a bus that's stuck there, and the car has to decide whether to plow into the bus and kill everyone on the bus or plow into the side of the road and kill the driver. And the ethical and interesting question here is, should the self-driving car go through the bus, or should the self-driving car say, okay, I can save more lives if I kill my driver? And does it make a difference if it's a school bus or a prison bus? And these are maybe ethical considerations that we're going to see as these devices are being in spaces where they can hurt us, and are going to have to make these decisions whether to pick the less of two evils. It could be completely mathematical, or there could be these cultural considerations, these ethics that are very human to us.
What about asking other panelists what they think about that?
Okay.
I mean, you made a face.
No, I'm just making faces.
Missy, wouldn't that be programmed in? I mean, what do you think about? You must think about that kind of stuff.
No, I do. I mean, it's a classic ethical conundrum. It's the person on the bridge over the train, So this is, in philosophy classes, this is argued quite frequently with or without technology. And I think these are good questions. I think that they're good questions. And that would be, the assumption is all the technology is working perfectly. We are so far away from that. I will tell you, as a person who's working in this space, the Google car and driverless cars in general are great, but they will not ever be able to be deployed in the way that Sebastian and everybody else wants, because they can't follow hand gestures. And there's some very technical reasons, like, my daughter's school in the morning has 3 hand gesture cops there, right there. That actually turns out to be a long pole in the tent for driverless cars. And it's funny, but something so simple is actually such a conundrum for technology, right? So, and we could have a long technical discussion later, which, if you've really got some time on your hands, I'll draw you some pictures. But the issue about the sensor reliability and the uncertainty in the equation, which I will talk more about on Sunday, are the main drivers of this. And so until we can manage uncertainty, the question is, if we could manage that uncertainty, would that decision be made? Right, and so we have pilots do this all the time. Should a pilot eject, or should he fly the plane into the side of the building, kind of a thing? And mistakes are made. So there will never be a perfect system, whether it's robot or human, trying to make these fine ethical decisions. I think what it really means is we will make mistakes regardless of where robots go in that technology. What it means, it's going to change the American Bar Association, so they're very excited about this and are like, right, they're standing up new divisions of drone and autonomous car technologies just so they can answer these types of questions and figure out who we should be suing.
Guilty. Yeah, no, I'm kidding.
Guilty. We could go down a lot of these rat holes further, but there were a lot of hands when I briefly suggested you could raise them. Okay, all the way back here. And do we have mics? How are we doing that? 15 minutes. Okay.
Hi. Let me ask you to take this to the issue of manufacturing. So
Identify yourself.
My name is Philip Zellico.
Thank you, Philip.
The, so imagine we think of the robot as capital equipment. Right now we think of the robots as exclusively in the possession of big companies that can afford to buy lots of robots. So we think of them as basically adjuncts that empowers the industrial model. Now suppose the robots become cheaper, Baxters, things like that. So now I've got a local clothing store, a little clothing store. I can actually have a robot that can cut clothes to measure and make a bespoke suit in my little Main Street clothing shop in Peoria, Iowa. And I can make all kinds of clothes now in my shop. And I can own that capital in my shop. And then I have to buy some materials and so on. So what I've just described now is a situation in which the ownership of capital actually moves down and outward, as opposed to always being central, and actually potentially empowers and enables the person at the retail end, not just the Googles of the world. Of course, if the Googles of the world don't snap up all the technology and make it unavailable to the people on the outer edges of the network. But I'd be grateful if you'd talk a little bit about the implications of some of these new innovations for the distribution of capital ownership and the ability to move the supply chain downward and outward toward the market.
Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I really am not, I'm just, here I volunteer, but I'm going to say I'm really not equipped to answer this question. That's why I'm going to try to answer it. I mean, I'm not an economist. I wouldn't be able to speculate about that. I don't know if any people here have training in that particular field. I can tell you that the legal issues are really interesting, and they're wide-ranging. So for instance, imagine that you just were to take one thing that a fast food restaurant does, and you were to automate it. You were to just have a robot, Baxter, whoever, come in there and just do that one task. And you were to fire all those people that did that task before in one state. There would be such a massive shift from payroll taxes to capital that you could collapse the state's tax infrastructure as a consequence of that. Or imagine that you could print a bunch of stuff at home, ordinary products that you'd want to use on these 3D printers. We didn't talk about 3D printers, although this is another technology that's really interesting where you can like print things in 3 dimensions, you know. And you could print things for your house in 3 dimensions instead of buying them from a manufacturer. That really complicates product liability, actually. And it makes it much harder for you to sue should you print a product that ends up hurting you. You can't use the same strict liability doctrine you could under product liability. I suppose I would be surprised where there are not similar sorts of effects in the economic realm. And I would encourage you to read something from the 1960s by Herbert Simon called, I think it's called, I'll think of it later and maybe try to email you, but it's a great series of essays from the 60s by Herbert Simon. It's like a management of men or something like that, and it's this fabulous sort of automation in the management of men. And it's this fabulous look at how automation will change economic models.
I think with that question, Philip, you're, as often with you, ahead of the curve. So that was really more of a comment than a question, but it was a very interesting one. And let's see if we can get somebody else to, okay, back here. Right there.
Hi, I'm Deborah Ritchie. With everything that you've said about Google and Facebook and Amazon, and we've put them on the map, a population, do you think it's going to be soon that the population will boycott them because of how they're trying to replace the human being in the workforce and how they're spying on us for the government? Just curious.
I would say definitely not, would be my first reaction to that one. Because, well, at least at the moment, there's no real evidence that that's the way those companies on balance are being perceived.
Well, there is
it
one.
could shift.
There is one. I mean, in San Francisco, there's a big backlash against Google right now. And it has to do, it's very interesting because it has to do with the buses particularly, but it's really deeper than that. It's a backlash against the class, the driving up of property values and rentals in San Francisco. So there's a really big pushback. And you definitely see this wave, of, Google was always this white knight, and Microsoft was sort of like the dark, Darth Vader. And Google's starting to evolve, and you know, it's interesting that there's a real pushback.
But that's really about wealth, not about the product.
No, I agree. It's true, although the product is, but it's affecting into the product. So late night television, there's all these parodies of Google Glass, and so I'm seeing it in subtle ways. Are we going to give up our Google search engines? You know, how many were willing to do that? No, because we love them. You want to? Would you? Interesting. So there may be pockets of resistance. But, you know, I think the other thing to think about is, because we do, I mean, we always have this you know, this complex, multifaceted reaction to technology. We think about the negatives. And, you know, as you're saying, there's a positive to robotics where it can actually democratize. It can make these kind of, you know, it can make it possible for a small firm to be competitive that it might not otherwise be able to be. I think that's really interesting. Or if driverless cars, or maybe just driver assisted, if it can save on driver fatalities from, let's say, drivers who are distracted because they're checking their email or Facebook, and or because they've had a drink or they have kids in the back or anything like that, which would actually, that idea is really exciting, that you could actually cut down on fatalities.
That's happening now. I mean, BMW
Right.
and Audi and other companies already have cars that have considerable robotics in them effectively. And I know a guy who bought a BMW that had that partly so he could look at his text while he was commuting on 101 from San Francisco to Palo Alto. You know, and he does.
This is
Because it keeps in line and it knows roughly what to do.
when the state of Nevada wrote its first driverless car bill, its law.
Which you helped them write.
Well, I mean, they consulted this group that I was part of, yeah. And basically what happened was that they wrote the law in such a way that said, basically autonomous driving is when a computer replaces anything a human does in driving. And you might imagine Audi and BMW and all those folks who make these luxury cars were like, whoa, wait a second, we do that all the time in exactly the ways you described. And if you look at the law, there's no reason you would ever do this, but trust me, if you look at the law, they've actually had to cross that definition out and then write a new definition that excluded all these driver-assisted programs that are already there. Just a little.
Wow, okay, a lot of hands up. How about you back there? And let's try to make these back and forth. Oh, that wasn't the person, but we'll get to her next. Go ahead, now you got the mic, go ahead. Oh, well then, whatever, shift it over. Fine. But I just want this to move fast because a lot of people. Go
My
ahead.
name's Jocelyn Castor. I'm going to be a junior at Brown University. My question is kind of more about like the social aspect. How do you think society will change, I guess, on a social aspect, but also like a business aspect, a creative aspect, when people don't need to leave their house to even get a carton of milk? They don't need to leave their house to go to work. You know, like how is human potential going to be changed? What's the purpose of cities when that, I don't know, happens? It just kind of seems like such a change in the way that humans will live their lives and just like interact with each other. That seems unnatural. So how do you think humans are going to take on that
That's a
new
big
role?
question, which is close to a really good comment in itself. But anybody have a quick reaction to that?
That's an Alex question.
Alex, yeah, go ahead.
It's interesting. There are ways that robotics can both augment and separate people from one another. I always give this interesting example of the dog. So a lot of people say, oh, robots are going to come in the house, they're going to replace pets, and we're going to have social relationships with them.
Hybo.
Take us away, yeah. But dogs are human invention. We've been genetically breeding them for generations to be our companions, and they're not viewed as anything abnormal. So obviously, technology versus a dog, there are other interesting considerations to make there. But I think it's not as black and white as that. And I think we're very adaptable as humans in very social ways. I don't think it's ever going to be completely erased. And I think we always look at technology as or a lot of time look at technology like it's very external. But technology is inherently human. We've made it, all of it here, right? It's us. We've built this up with what we are. So looking at technology and humanity separate, it seems easy, but I think they're intertwined in a way that's a lot more complicated.
Yeah, people might. Who would have guessed that we'd all be carrying around what's effectively a supercomputer that has this extraordinary range of quasi-magical functions and still think everything's basically fine? I mean, The world changes fast and we integrate these things.
Although Alex, it just gave me a thought of, imagine if Amazon announced that they were going to use dogs to deliver products. People would love it, yeah.
At least the dogs jumping out of trucks as they're driving down the road.
Dalmatians.
Dalmatians. With Cruella de Vil controlling them. Okay, that person back there.
Hi, I have a 2-point question. One is, I just wanted to know from the panel how many people have been in the driverless car before. Just curious, because I would take a driverless car over a texting teenager on the road any day. But my question is, and I think this is for Missy and the other ones, is you were talking about, pilots and airplanes and how pilots might be extinct. And if you had a plane going down, would you prefer, we just saw what happened in the plane that went down in San Francisco, that it was pilot error. I don't think every pilot in the air is Captain Sully. So if you had to pick, knowing what you know about artificial intelligence robotics, would you take the autopilot or would you take the pilot, if looking at every pilot that's out there?
That's not a fair question because I'm a commercial pilot, and so I take a pilot with me every time I go flying. And I feel like I could, get up in there and cockpit and land anything, right? No, so I think it's a great question, and it starts to border on something there's a concept called shared fate. The real reason you want a pilot in the plane is not so much to land the plane, but you want somebody in the front to share your own fate in case something goes wrong. And this is a very human trait. And so I do not think that we will ever get to a place where we have passenger drone jets, where you get on with 400 of your closest friends and there's no pilot on board. And that's because humans need humans. For no other reason than you've got to have somebody to control drunk and belligerent passengers, right?
But isn't that more or less true now? The planes are quasi-robotic
and I was about to say, and all of you who've ever flown on an Airbus and or some variants of Boeing aircraft have been on a drone. There are planes in this world today that can go gate to gate. The pilot never touches anything but a bunch of buttons. It can back itself out of the gate, go to the runway, take off, fly, land, everything. So it's the question of what do we want a human there for? We want a human there for is basically our security blanket in case something goes wrong. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
But you got to get out the thing about texting.
Oh yeah, so that we talked about it. So I think, but one of the things we are all too human, and it hasn't been widely disseminated by the FAA because they don't want you to know this, but I've got some insider knowledge. We do, in this country and around the world, we're having problems with texting while taxiing with pilots.
Not to mention when they're flying, of course.
Well,
if they got connection.
There's no cell phone signal.
If you get a connectivity.
We've got that. Well, unless they're on
Yeah, they got Wi-Fi.
I wonder if
They've got it.
But it is such a human, the human need, and I think this actually speaks to the other part of the question. The other question here about the social capital that we're investing in these systems. So in some ways, we've been more separated, but I see my own students and everyone in this room who I've been seeing texting. I can tell. I'm a teacher. I'm a professor. I see it. We actually feel an increased sense of connectivity because we feel like we have to be talking to each other all the time, right? So I don't. It's not a have or have not.
Well,
I think it's just different.
So wait, I'm curious about this. How many of you are texting or tweeting? How many are tweeting out here? Not too many?
So there's about 15 people tweeting.
Because tweeting is a little different, because tweeting, like in this context, I almost feel like I'm supposed to tweet. It's like my duty.
That's because
to
you live in San
share.
Francisco.
I'm sharing this from experience. I haven't done it yet, but I would.
I tweeted from your thing just now.
You did? Yeah,
one of the
exactly.
things that Sebastian said, and I don't tweet that often.
But you put it out
But
there.
when he said, you asked him how did Udacity happen, and he said something like, I think if you want to really innovate, you should stay completely away from anyone in that industry. And I thought that was such a great quote, I tweeted it. I think we actually have to end, even though we didn't really hear the number of pilots who were texting on the runway, which Missy could have told us, but it's quite a large number.
Okay, so we have to just say that there are two people in the audience, one on the stage and one in the audience that I think we need to give some credit to. And it's really marvelous to have Missy here. And for those of you who don't know much about her, you can find her on our website and at Duke University. But Missy was one of the, if not the first, women fighter jet pilot for the U.S. Navy.
Yeah.
Thank you. So she knows what she's talking about. Now, as we're going to close, we've been listening to a lot about Google Glass, but we really have to acknowledge the one person who's wearing it, which is the one person who had a lot to do with how it was invented, which is Sebastian Thrun. So I think you should just get the last word.
Oh, Sebastian's actually here.
I love you guys.
Okay, so those of you who've never seen Google Glass, just stay up so we can get a good look at it.
He's wearing. Come rip it off my face, please.
You know me, Sebastian, I'd love
It
to.
turns out taking a person's image.
Don't
is
mess
much
with
less-
her.
Wait, before we finish, come on, Kitty, since you did this. Sebastian, any observations on what you've heard that you disagree with or found shocking?
I don't know. I mean.
He's the
when
guy
you-
who's behind Google Glass.
When you talk about the Google self-driving car having this moral dilemma of like killing a school bus or killing its passengers, I think it's just not going to drive as fast. I mean, it's not going to make a mistake in the first place to be that stupid, as many of us are. I don't know. My gut reaction is like the world is so amazing and there's so many great things to happen. I think we should stop saying no. We should like really think constructively how we make these things happen.
That's what you're doing. And I think a lot of us think it's pretty cool, even though it might be scary in some ways. So thank you for that. Thank you all. Great panel.
Thank you, David.
And I would say, Kitty put together, thank you to Kitty for putting together a great panel. Could have gone on a lot longer.